They say silence is golden, but it can also be deadly. We break the silence on the stories that have been buried for far too long, bringing them to life with vivid visuals. Hit subscribe now and let the stories finally speak for themselves.
The day my mother-in-law called me a decoration, I was holding a spreadsheet that had just saved her son's company $400,000. She didn't know that, of course. She never knew anything I did. That was sort of the whole point. Let me back up. My name is Audrey. I'm 38 years old, and for 11 years I worked as the behind-the-scenes engine of a mid-sized commercial real estate firm called Vantage Group, a company that my husband's family had built from nothing in the early 90s, and nearly run into the ground twice since then. I didn't just work there, I restructured their vendor contracts, I renegotiated their lease terms. I built the financial model they still use today, the one my brother-in-law presents at every quarterly meeting like he invented it himself. For 11 years I showed up early, stayed late, and kept my mouth shut. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they would eventually notice. I told myself a lot of things that turned out not to be true. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. I married into the Caldwell family when I was 27. My husband, I'll call him my husband throughout this, because even now I find it easier than using his name, was the second of 3 children. His older brother, who I'll call my brother-in-law, was the one running Vantage Group at the time. His younger sister, my sister-in-law, had just graduated college and was already being groomed for a senior role she hadn't earned. I had a finance degree from a state school nobody in his family had ever heard of, and a background in commercial property management. When my mother-in-law first met me, she asked what I did. And when I told her, she nodded slowly and said, "So, administrative." Not a question. A verdict. I should have paid more attention to that moment. Instead, I married her son 6 months later. My husband was not a bad person. I want to be clear about that because the story isn't about him being a villain. It's about him being absent in a way that is somehow worse than being cruel, the kind of absence that looks like presence, that sits at the dinner table and nods along and never once says, "Wait, that's not right." I joined Vantage Group officially about 18 months after the wedding. My mother-in-law was the one who suggested it, which in retrospect should have been the first warning sign. "We need someone to help with the back office," she said. "You understand numbers. It would keep you busy." Keep me busy. Like I was a house cat that had started chewing on the furniture. I took the role. There was no title, no salary negotiation, no offer letter. I was family. Family didn't need paperwork. Within 3 months, I had untangled a vendor billing mess that had been bleeding the company $60,000 a year. I found it by accident, going through invoices nobody had looked at in 2 years. I fixed it quietly, updated the ledgers, and moved on. My mother-in-law found out 6 months later when the accountant mentioned it during a year-end review. She nodded and said, "Good. See, you're useful after all." That was the closest she ever came to a thank you. I told myself it was fine. People in family businesses often go unrecognized. It's just how it works. You do it because you love your spouse, because you believe in the long game, because someday it will all mean something. The years stacked up. I became, without ever being given the title, the person who held everything together. I managed the firm's 2 biggest client relationships personally, because my brother-in-law had burned through 3 account managers in 4 years, and the clients had started asking for me by name. I handled the financing negotiations on their commercial acquisitions because my mother-in-law didn't trust outside consultants, and my brother-in-law's eyes glazed over when anyone used the phrase debt service coverage ratio. I also planned my sister-in-law's bridal shower. I organized the company holiday party every December. I remembered everyone's birthdays, ordered the flowers when someone's parent died, coordinated the catering when Vantage Group hosted a client dinner. I was the wallpaper. Always there. Never seen. There was a moment, I think it was my 8th year, when a new associate joined the firm, a sharp young woman named Nobody Important, and she pulled me aside after her first staff meeting and said, "Can I ask you something? You seem to know everything about this company. What's your actual title?" I opened my mouth and realized I didn't have an answer. I went home that night and asked my husband. He looked genuinely puzzled, like I'd asked him the capital of a country he'd never heard of. "I don't know," he said. "Does it matter?" I said no. I was lying. The thing that finally broke everything open was not what you might expect. It wasn't a screaming match, or a betrayal, or a single dramatic moment. It was a company anniversary party. Vantage Group turned 30 years old last April. My mother-in-law had been planning the celebration for 8 months. A formal dinner at a downtown hotel, 200 guests, clients, investors, press. The kind of event designed to make the Caldwell family look like exactly what they wanted to appear to be: polished, successful, established. I coordinated the entire event. I negotiated the hotel contract. I managed the catering vendor. I designed the program. I wrote my mother-in-law's speech, which she delivered word for word without changing a syllable, and without mentioning my name once. I also, in the 6 weeks leading up to the party, finalized the most significant deal in Vantage Group's history. I need to explain the deal. For 2 years, I had been quietly cultivating a relationship with a private equity group called Meridian Capital. They had approached Vantage Group initially through a cold inquiry, which my brother-in-law had ignored because he didn't recognize the name. I recognized the name. I had followed Meridian for years. I knew their acquisition strategy. I knew their portfolio, and I knew that Vantage Group was exactly the kind of regional operator they were looking for as a platform investment. I reached out on my own. I spent 4 months building the relationship. I structured our financials in a way that told the right story. I flew to New York twice on my own dime, because I never asked the company to reimburse me for things I'd initiated myself, and sat across from Meridian's managing partner and made the case for why Vantage Group was worth $34 million. He believed me. Because the numbers were real. Because I'd made them real. By the week of the anniversary party, we were 3 days away from signing a letter of intent. $34 million. A deal that would change everything for the Caldwell family. Nobody at the party knew about it except me. My mother-in-law gave her speech. She thanked her sons, both of them, though my husband had never worked a day at Vantage Group. She thanked her daughter. She thanked the longtime clients. She thanked the accountant who had been with the firm since 1999. She did not thank me. I sat at a table near the back, next to my husband, who squeezed my hand and said quietly, "She just forgets." "She doesn't forget," I said. "She chooses." He didn't answer. Then came the moment. They had prepared a highlight reel, a video presentation of Vantage Group's biggest milestones. The financing deal I had structured in 2019, that allowed them to acquire their largest property, was described in the video as a bold decision by leadership. The client retention strategy I had built from scratch was credited to my brother-in-law by name, with a photo of him shaking hands with the clients I had personally kept from walking out the door. I sat there and I watched my 11 years get absorbed, quietly and cleanly, into a story that had no room for me in it. And then my mother-in-law, standing at the podium for a second round of remarks, looked out at the room and said, "Of course, none of this would be possible without the Caldwell family. Real estate is a family business, and only family can truly understand what it takes to build something that lasts." She looked directly at me when she said it, not warmly, poignantly. The message was not subtle. I was not family in the way that counted. I was the wife of the second son. I was, as she had said 11 years ago, administrative. I smiled. I picked up my glass of water. I thought about Meridian Capital's managing partner and the letter of intent sitting in my email inbox awaiting my signature. I thought about the fact that the deal I had built, 2 years of work, $34 million, was structured around me, not around the Caldwell name. Around my relationship, my credibility, my track record with Meridian. The managing partner had said it to me directly 6 weeks earlier. "We're investing in the team. Frankly, we're investing in you." I had not mentioned that part to my mother-in-law. I set down my glass. I excused myself from the table, walked to the lobby, and called the managing partner of Meridian Capital from a quiet corner near the coat check. He picked up on the second ring. "I need to discuss the structure of the letter of intent," I said. "Of course," he said. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said carefully, "that I'd like to explore what it would look like if the transaction were structured around a management buyout rather than a full acquisition, with me as the incoming operator." There was a pause. "That's an interesting pivot," he said. "Walk me through your thinking." I walked him through it. I had been walking through it in my head for about 3 years, actually, ever since I first understood that the Caldwells would never give me a seat at the table and that I might eventually have to build my own. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. I stood by the coat check while 200 people celebrated a company I had quietly, carefully, and completely positioned for sale. By the time I walked back into the ballroom, the path was clear. What happened next took about 6 weeks. I won't pretend it was simple. It was one of the most exhausting and isolating periods of my life. I was still showing up to work every day. I was still answering emails, managing clients, handling the logistics that nobody else could handle. I was doing all of that while also working nights and weekends on the restructured deal. Meridian was willing, more than willing. The managing partner told me later that he'd been wondering for months whether I was truly in a position to deliver on the operational side, given the family structure. Learning that I was the one with the institutional relationships changed his calculus entirely. The new structure was straightforward. Meridian would acquire a controlling stake. I would come in as chief operating officer with an equity position, and the Caldwell family would receive a payout for their ownership, a fair one, roughly $22 million, which was less than the original 34, but still more than any of them deserved for what they had built versus what I had preserved. My mother-in-law found out on a Tuesday morning. I told her myself. I didn't send a lawyer first, which in retrospect may have been a mistake, but I had 11 years of things I needed to say out loud. I sat down in her office, the office where I had sat across from her hundreds of times, always in the chair on the other side of the desk, always in the position of explaining something she hadn't asked me to explain, and I told her everything, the timeline, the structure, my role, the payout. She was very still for a long time. You went around us, she said. I built something, I said. You were invited to be part of it. You chose not to see me. You're my son's wife. I'm also the reason Vantage Group is still solvent, I said. And I'm the reason it's worth $22 million today instead of zero. You can choose which one of those things to focus on. I know which one you'll choose. She told me to get out of her office. I did. I also cleared my desk that afternoon. There was less there than you'd expect after 11 years. I had always traveled light, kept most of what mattered to me at home or in my head. Never accumulated the kind of physical presence that would take more than an hour to remove. It took 40 minutes. I walked out of that building carrying one box and I did not look back. My husband and we separated 4 months later. That part of the story is its own story, and it doesn't belong here except to say that he spent those 4 months mostly silent, and when he finally spoke, what he said was, I didn't know it was that bad. I believed him. That was almost the saddest part. The deal closed 8 months after the anniversary party. Meridian and I rang in the close with a bottle of something I can't afford yet, but will be able to in about 6 months, and the managing partner made a small speech about the difference between a company and the people who actually run it. I thought about my mother-in-law's face in that office, the stillness of it, the moment when 11 years of collected smallness, every speech I wrote that she delivered without looking up, every birthday I remembered and every crisis I quietly resolved, compressed itself into a single reckoning. She called me, once, 3 months after the close. I let it go to voicemail. She said she hoped we could talk. She said she'd been thinking. She said she realized now that she hadn't always, and then there was a pause that lasted almost 4 seconds. And she said, appreciated your contributions. 11 years and a $34 million deal, and the word she landed on was contributions. I saved the voicemail. I don't know why. I think I needed to hear that she knew, even if she couldn't say it plainly, even if the word was wrong and the timing was years too late. I needed evidence that somewhere inside her she understood what she had dismissed. I play it sometimes, late at night, not out of bitterness, or not only out of bitterness, but because it reminds me that being seen, even partially, even reluctantly, is something. It's not enough. It was never going to be enough. But it's something. People ask me sometimes what the lesson is. They want a clean takeaway, a piece of advice they can fit on a coffee mug or a LinkedIn post. Know your worth. Don't let them dim your light. Leave the table that doesn't honor you. Here's what I actually learned. The table doesn't honor you. Here's what I actually learned. The table doesn't change. What changes is whether you decide to keep sitting there, quietly waiting to be acknowledged, or whether you go build a table that already has your name on it. I built the table. They sold me theirs. I think that's the version of the story I can live with. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the deal, not the paperwork, not the moment my mother-in-law found out, but the longer arc of it. The 11 years that led to a 20-minute phone call by a hotel coat check. Here's what I keep coming back to. Nothing that happened to me was random, and nothing that happened to them was random either. When you consistently take credit for work you didn't do, you quietly hollow out the thing you're trying to protect. My brother-in-law spent years presenting my financial models as his own thinking, and in doing so, he stopped developing any real thinking of his own. By the time the deal with Meridian was on the table, he genuinely didn't understand what we were worth or why. He had borrowed competence for so long that he had none left to stand on. That's not bad luck. That's the direct consequence of a choice, made over and over, to take rather than build. My mother-in-law is a smart woman. I want to say that clearly, because I think it matters. She built something real from nothing in the early 90s, and that took grit and vision and a tolerance for risk that I actually respect. But somewhere along the way, she confused the family name with the family's ability, and she stopped being able to tell the difference between the two. She kept the name front and center and let the ability drift to whoever was quietly willing to carry it. That was me, for 11 years. When I stopped carrying it, there was nothing left underneath. I don't say any of this with satisfaction. I say it because I think it's the most honest accounting I can give of what went wrong for them and what finally went right for me. The thing about staying invisible for too long is that you start to believe in your own invisibility. There were years, real years, not just hard weeks, when I genuinely wondered if I was overestimating my own contributions. Maybe I wasn't as essential as I thought. Maybe the company would have found a way. My mother-in-law was very good at making me feel like the answer to that question was yes. That kind of doubt doesn't come from nowhere. It gets installed slowly by people who benefit from you not trusting yourself. What broke that doubt in the end wasn't anger. It was evidence. Meridian's managing partner looked me in the eye and said, "We're investing in you. Not in the name, not in the family, in you." And something that had been very tightly wound inside me for about a decade just quietly released. I had built something real. It was real whether or not anyone in that family ever acknowledged it. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this. Not the revenge, not the $34 million, which sounds dramatic but is mostly just a number. The thing I'd want you to take is this: your work is real even when no one is recording it. Your competence exists even when someone else is getting credit for it. The gap between what you're given and what you're worth is not a permanent condition. It is a temporary imbalance, and imbalances, given enough time and the right moment, correct themselves. Audrey built the table. They sold her theirs. That's not a coincidence. That's 11 years of choosing integrity over recognition, quietly, every single day, until the day it mattered.